The truck pulls into his driveway on a Tuesday morning in October. No drama, no sirens, just a grey pickup with a bank logo on the door and two men in button-down shirts carrying a folder each. Dale Harmon is sitting on the porch with a coffee when they pull up. He watches them walk across the gravel. He already knows why they're here. But 5 years ago, he couldn't have imagined a version of this visit where he was the one with leverage. 5 years ago, these same men, or men just like them, were pushing a loan document across a desk and telling him he needed to grow or get out of the way. Today, they're here because they want to know how he's still standing when half the operators they financed aren't. They're not here to threaten him. They're here to study him. He wasn't the biggest, he just lasted longer. To understand why that truck is in his driveway, you have to go back to the fall auction 5 years earlier. And you have to understand what it felt like to pull a 4-row cornhead into a field while every neighbor within 10 miles was running 12 rows minimum. October, 5 years ago, the county equipment auction outside of Millerton. Combines lined up in the mud, price tags like down payments on small houses. Dale is there with his older Case IH combine and that 4-row head, and the reaction from the crowd is exactly what you'd expect from a community where equipment size is a status symbol. A neighbor named Vic Paulson, who runs a 24-row head on a machine that cost more than most people's houses, walks past and says it loud enough to be heard. 4 rows, that thing must take all month. Laughter, not mean laughter, not the cartoonish villain kind, just the casual dismissive kind that stings worse because it's not even personal. To Vic and the rest of them, Dale isn't a threat or a fool. He's just small. He doesn't register as competition. That's the part that burns. Dale farms 80 owned acres and 40 rented. 120 total. His 4-row head is appropriate for that scale. That's the thing nobody at the auction wants to talk about. The math behind the machine. A 16-row or 24-row head makes financial sense when you're farming 200, 1,500, 2,000 acres. When you're farming a 120, it's a liability disguised as ambition. But try explaining that at a county auction in October. Try explaining debt service coverage ratios to someone standing next to a brand new combine that cost $450,000. Nobody wants to hear it. A bank representative named Tom Fessler approaches Dale near the edge of the lot. He's pleasant, professional, the kind of guy who genuinely believes he's offering something good. He slides into the conversation sideways. We're seeing a lot of operators your size take advantage of some attractive financing right now. Rates are sitting around 3.75%. If you wanted to step up your equipment package, monthly payments work out to roughly $15,000 a month, about $180,000 annually. On the right acreage base, that pencils out pretty clean. Dale does the math in his head standing in that field. $180,000 in annual equipment payments means corn has to stay above $5 a bushel, yields have to stay strong, and rented acres have to stay rented. 3 things have to go right simultaneously every single year, with zero margin for any of them to go wrong. He says he'll think about it. Tom Fessler hands him a card and walks toward the next operator. Dale stands there in the mud, looking at his 4-row head, and almost talks himself into signing. Because pride is powerful, because watching Vic Paulson drive past with a machine that could harvest Dale's entire operation in an afternoon is the kind of thing that makes a person do stupid math. He doesn't sign. Not that day, but the offer doesn't go away either. Year 1 was the year that almost broke his discipline. Corn hit $5.60 a bushel that spring. Everything was working. His 120 acres produced well. His older combine held together. He netted more per acre than he had in 3 years. And everywhere he looked, operators who had expanded were making money. The land flipper 2 townships over had scaled to 1,800 acres and was posting photos of his new header online. Vic Paulson bought a second machine. The loan documents were still sitting in Dale's truck. He'd printed them out. He'd filled in half the blanks. He sat at his kitchen table for 3 evenings in a row with a calculator and a notepad, and every time he ran the numbers, they came back to the same place. This works if prices stay here. It works if nothing goes wrong. That if is where the whole thing lives. Farming runs on ifs, What Tom Fessler's offer didn't account for, what the equipment payment schedule didn't show, was the DSCR, the debt service coverage ratio. It's simple. Take your net operating income and divide it by your total debt payments for the year. A ratio of 1. 25 means you earn $1. 25 for every dollar you owe in payments. Banks want to see 1, 2 or higher. At corn prices of $5.60 and strong yields, expansion looked like it penciled out at 1. 3, maybe 1. 4, comfortable. But DSCR isn't a fixed number. It moves with prices, yields, and interest rates. And in year 1, nobody was talking about what happens to that ratio when rates move. Dale didn't sign the papers. He put them back in the truck and drove home, not because he was sure he was right, because he wasn't sure enough to be wrong. Would you have expanded? Drop a comment below. Year 2 is when the rented acres became a problem. Cash rents across the county were climbing. Pressure from expanding operators pushing up against each other meant that landlords could ask more and get it. Rates that had been sitting at $240 per acre were moving toward $300, some parcels north of that. The 40 rented acres Dale had been farming for 6 years came up for renewal. The landlord was a retired couple named Gerhardt. Decent people, not predatory, they just knew what the market was bearing. They asked $300 per acre. The operator to Dale's north offered $310. Dale ran the numbers at his kitchen table. At $310 per acre on 40 acres, that's $12,400 in annual rent before he plants a single seed. Add inputs, equipment operating costs, and any land payment, and the margin on those rented acres at current prices is thin. If corn drops below $4 or $50, those acres lose money. Every single year he rents them at that rate, he's betting the price holds. He called the Gerhardts and told them he couldn't match the bid. He thanked them for 6 years of working together. Hung up the phone and sat with the quiet for a while. 80 owned acres. That was his operation now, smaller than it had ever been. And the voice in the back of his head that sounded a lot like Vic Paulson said, "This is what happens when you don't grow." He wasn't wrong to lose the rent. He was right to lose it. That's a hard distinction to hold on to when you're watching someone else farm ground you used to work. Would you have matched the rent bid? Tell me in the comments. By the end of year 2, the interest rate environment was shifting. The Federal Reserve started moving. Rates that had been at 3.75% when Tom Fessler made his pitch were climbing. 6% by the end of the year. Closer to 7% on new agricultural equipment loans by the following spring. Here's why that matters. Leverage works until rates move. An operator who financed a $600,000 equipment package at 3.75% had annual payments around $140,000. At 6.5%, that same package runs closer to $165,000 in annual payments. That's $25,000 in additional fixed cost that appears overnight without a single acre being farmed differently. Fixed costs don't flex with the market. They don't shrink when corn prices drop. They stay exactly where they are while your margin gets compressed from both sides. The operators who had expanded aggressively into rented ground at $300 plus per acre were now staring at a cost structure that required corn to stay above $4.75 just to break even. Some of them were leveraged into multi-million-dollar equipment packages. One large operator, 3 counties over, was carrying $2.4 million in equipment debt at rates that had reset higher than his original projection. Dale Harmon, farming 80 acres with a paid-off older combine and a 4-row corn head that everyone had laughed at, had a fixed cost structure that looked like a completely different business. Lower fixed costs don't make you rich in good years. They keep you alive in bad ones. Year 3 is when corn broke, not a catastrophic crash. A slow, grinding decline. Prices fell from the $5 range toward $4.20, $4.30. Below the magic number of $4.50, where most heavily leveraged operations started bleeding. Debt doesn't shrink when prices fall. That's the sentence that kept running through Dale's head as he watched the commodity boards. His neighbors' equipment payments didn't adjust when the market moved. Their land rents didn't renegotiate automatically. Their input costs didn't drop fast enough to compensate. The margin compression was real and it was quiet, and it showed up in bank statements before it showed up anywhere else. He heard through the co-op that one of the larger operators south of town, a guy who had been farming 2,200 acres, running a 24-row head, carrying payments across 2 combine packages, was in restructuring conversations with his lender. Not foreclosure, not yet, but the kind of renegotiation that happens when your DSCR falls below 1.0, when you owe more in debt service than you earn in operating income, when the bank starts having opinions about your management decisions. Bigger equipment means bigger fixed costs. That's not a criticism of ambition. It's math. Dale watched this happen from 80 acres with no equipment debt and a 4-row corn head. He wasn't comfortable. He wasn't gloating. He was doing his own numbers every night at the kitchen table, making sure his own operation stayed in the black. At corn prices in the low 4s, his owned acre model still produced positive cash flow, thin but positive. He wasn't getting rich. He wasn't going broke either. He was surviving the part of the cycle that kills the over-leveraged. Midway through year 4, an auction sign appeared in a field Dale had driven past his whole life. Not an equipment auction, a land auction. 280 acres that had been farmed by the Alderman family for 3 generations. The land itself wasn't in trouble. The Aldermans had owned it for decades. But the operation that had been renting it couldn't continue. The structure had gotten too heavy, the payments too large. The renter folded his operation and the land went up for bids, as the Aldermans decided to sell rather than release. Dale drove past that auction sign every morning for 2 weeks. The land was good ground, not perfect but solid. 2 miles from his own operation, he knew every acre of it. He called Tom Fessler. Same bank, different conversation this time. He had 80 owned acres free and clear, no equipment debt, 2 years of positive cash flow in a down market, and enough in reserve to put 30% down on an additional parcel. His DSCR on a conservative purchase scenario came back at 1.4, solid. Tom Fessler didn't laugh at the 4-row cornhead this time. He ran the numbers, called the credit department, and called Dale back in 48 hours with a yes. Dale bought 120 acres. Conservative purchase price, conservative loan structure. Fixed rate, payment that worked even if corn stayed below $4. $50 for 2 more years. He didn't try to win the auction at any price. He set a number, bid to it, and stopped. Some of the other bidders were operators trying to rebuild after restructuring. Some were investors. Dale wasn't the highest bidder on everything that went up. He was the right bidder on the 120 acres that fit his model. He drove home from the title company with 200 owned acres and a loan structure his older combine could support. By year 5, the landscape had changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but it had changed. The operator who had restructured ended up downsizing to the acreage his cash flow could actually support. He's still farming, smaller, more careful, probably better for it long term. Another large operation in the county sold equipment at auction, late model machines at significant losses, the kind of markdown that happens when debt forces a timeline. A third operator, Vic Paulson, was still running, but had renegotiated his rented acres and quietly shed about 400 of them when the landlords pushed rates again and the math stopped working. Nobody announced failure. Nobody made speeches. It happened in quiet conversations between farmers and bankers, in filed restructuring documents, in auction listings that showed up online with no explanation needed. Dale Harmon's 4-row cornhead was still running. His older combine was still running. He had 200 owned acres, a manageable loan on the last 120, equipment with no debt against it, and a cash reserve that had grown through 3 down years because his fixed costs were low enough to allow it. He wasn't the biggest. He just lasted longer. Which brings us back to that Tuesday morning in October. The bank truck in the driveway. The 2 men in button-down shirts with their folders. They're from the agricultural lending division, not Tom Fessler. He moved to a different office. These are portfolio analysts. They've been reviewing farm credit files across the region, looking at who weathered the down cycle and how. Dale's file caught someone's attention. Positive DSCR through 3 consecutive tight margin years. Conservative equipment structure. Land purchase made during the downturn at below peak pricing. No restructuring, no delinquency, no renegotiation. They want to talk about whether Dale would be interested in a line of credit for future expansion. They also want to understand his model because they're trying to figure out why some of the operations they financed at 3.75% didn't survive, and this one did. Dale pours them coffee and sits down at the same kitchen table where he ran all those numbers. He doesn't gloat, he doesn't lecture, he just answers their questions. Yes, he kept fixed costs low deliberately. Yes, he passed on rented acres when the bid price exceeded what he could support at conservative corn prices. Yes, he bought equipment that fit his scale instead of scaling to fit his equipment. Yes, the 4-row corn head was slower. It was also paid for. One of the analysts asks about the 4-row head specifically. He'd seen it in the file photos, and apparently it had been noted somewhere as a point of curiosity. Dale tells him about the auction 5 years ago. About Vic Paulson walking past and making the crack about harvest taking all month. About Tom Fessler and the $180,000 annual payment offer at 3.75%. The analyst writes something in his folder. What he's writing, Dale suspects, is something about how the farmers who got into trouble weren't necessarily bad farmers. They were good farmers with cost structures built for a rate environment and price environment that didn't hold. When rates went to 6 and 7% and corn went below 450, the math broke. Not because they were wrong to grow, because they grew faster than the margin could support. Leverage works until rates move. Fixed costs don't flex. Debt doesn't shrink when prices fall. The analyst closes his folder and thanks Dale for his time. They talk about the line of credit briefly. Dale says he'll think about it. He means it this time, not because he's going to load up on debt, but because a low-rate working capital line from a bank that now views him as a stable credit might be useful at the right moment. He'll run the numbers, he'll decide based on what the math says, not what the pride says. He walks them back to their truck. They shake hands. The truck pulls out of the driveway and disappears down the county road. Dale stands in the gravel for a minute. The combine is in the shed. The 4-row corn head is mounted and ready. Harvest starts in 4 days. He has 200 acres to get through. It'll take longer than Vic Paulson's operation. It always did. He wasn't the biggest. He just lasted longer. 5 years ago, they were laughing at the 4-row head at the county auction. Today, the bank is studying his numbers, trying to understand how he came out of a 3-year downturn with a stronger balance sheet than when he went in. He didn't do anything magical. He didn't get lucky yields or catch a price spike. He just built a cost structure that could survive the bad years, and the bad years eventually came for everyone who hadn't. The 4-row corn head isn't a hero of this story. It's not superior technology. It's not some lost wisdom. It's slower and less efficient, and it'll always be slower and less efficient than a 16-row on 2,000 acres. On 80 acres, on 120 acres, on 200 acres, it's appropriate. That's the whole point. The equipment fit the scale. The scale fit the cash flow. The cash flow survived the cycle. The neighbor who overbid on rented acres is farming less ground now. The operator who financed the $600,000 equipment package at 3.75% hit a wall when rates reset and margins compressed simultaneously. The guy who expanded to 2,200 acres on rented ground learned that cash rent doesn't flex when corn prices fall. The landlord still gets paid even when the operator doesn't. Bigger equipment means bigger fixed costs. That's not an argument against big equipment. It's an argument for matching your cost structure to your actual revenue base rather than your aspirational one. Dale Harmon isn't going to end up in a farming magazine. He's not going to be the subject of an industry success story about innovative scaling. He farms 200 acres with an older combine and a 4-row corn head, and he does it debt-light enough that bad years don't break him. 5 years ago, that made him a punchline at the county auction. Today, the bank drives out to ask him how he did it. Would you have stayed small? Tell me in the comments below, because this is exactly the kind of decision that looks obvious in hindsight and almost impossible in the moment when everyone around you is expanding and the rates are low and the prices are high and the loan officer is handing you a pen. The discipline to say no when the math isn't right. The discipline to lose rented acres rather than overbid. The discipline to watch neighbors scale up and not follow them off that cliff. None of that is comfortable. None of it comes with applause at the county auction. It comes with a bank truck in your driveway 5 years later and two men in button-down shirts asking to study your numbers. He wasn't the biggest, he just lasted longer. If this story made you think differently about fixed costs, leverage, and what it really means to build something sustainable in agriculture, hit subscribe. More stories like this every week about the farmers and operators who built something real by understanding the math behind the machine. And if you know someone being told right now that they need to scale up to stay relevant, share this with them. Let them decide for themselves. The 4-row cornhead everyone laughed at is still running. That's all the argument it needs to make. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.